Thick gray clouds clung to the sky, a somber barrier between the sun and the remains of civilization below. People rarely lifted their eyes upward, for the sight of those clouds invoked both fear and frustration, reminders that the days of a bright blue sky were long lost. In this world, oxygen had become a currency, carefully hoarded by those who had enough influence or luck to afford it. The rest of society struggled for each difficult breath, clinging to scraps of purified air in overcrowded domes or inhaling the filtered fumes that came with living on the fringe. The high walls around these domes served as a visible barrier, telling those outside that their presence was neither desired nor considered. Somewhere behind those walls, the wealthy lived in relative comfort, protected from rancid air by advanced filtration systems and unyielding security forces. It was the fear of suffocation that led to the creation of the oxygen forests. Initially touted as massive environmental rehabilitation projects, where new trees could be engineered to thrive in harsh conditions, these labs soon evolved into clandestine realms for the powerful. Tree lines bristled with pastel leaves, each genetically modified to produce greater levels of oxygen than any natural forest once did. Subtle lights danced amidst the branches, reflecting the carefully controlled temperature and humidity. There was no scattered sunlight here, only the calculated hum of machines that maintained perfect photosynthetic conditions. And while the man-made forests were pitched as humanity's salvation from the toxic smog, they quickly became a playground for the privileged few, an exclusive corner of paradise guarded by armed patrols and biometric scanners. Outside the thick steel gates, people had grown gaunt, their lips often cracked from dryness, their eyelashes tinted gray from soot. Bandanas, scarves, or makeshift respirators served as constant accessories, covering faces when the wind whipped up toxic dust. In such desperation, thieves no longer sought gold or jewels. They hoarded inhalers and small oxygen canisters. Children were taught to cherish each unfiltered breath, because the next might taste like burnt metal. Back-market dealers supplied subpar air filters, offering illusions of safety at prices that drove families to desperation. Meanwhile, the rumor of the oxygen forest compelled some to gamble everything for a chance to reach these sanctuaries, only to be turned away by stone-faced guards or to vanish into the night. Adira was 18 and had never known a world before the smog. Every memory she possessed was awash in gradations of gray. Still, she was told stories of a time when forests covered the land and the common citizen did not worry about basic respiration. Her mother, gripping Adira's small hand when she was younger, would often whisper these tales of crisp morning air and the sweet aroma of pine. Whether or not these recollections were fully accurate or colored by nostalgia, Adira had clung to them as her impetus for survival. She had spent her childhood in one of the overcrowded city blocks, inhaling the stench of decaying infrastructure and daily bracing for the coughing fits that seized her. Their home was a cramped apartment with little more than a lamp, a single bed, and an improvised wood-burning stove. Vines of mold stretched from the cracks in the ceiling, and the overhead lights flickered in a losing battle against the flicker of power surges. Few had neighbors they could truly trust. The scarcity of resources hollowed out any sense of community, replacing it with a watchful paranoia. There was sporadic talk of revolution, of tearing down those walls behind which the wealthy thrived. But such chatter rarely lasted. Usually the conversation ended with people shaking their heads, convinced that it was a hopeless endeavor. Yet Adira was not the type to let the hopelessness consume her. As a child, she'd salvaged scraps of plastic and wire from the junk heaps, piecing together small contraptions, a broken fan, a radio that sometimes crackled with music. Growing up, she hoarded anything that looked like machinery or technical equipment, teaching herself rudimentary engineering whenever she had enough oxygen in her lungs to concentrate. She wasn't alone in her obsession. Her mother, once an ambitious scientist before the world turned, was her guiding star. The two spent long evenings tinkering, referencing dog-eared textbooks salvaged from old library dumps. And with every bit of progress they made, a better air filter, a tiny oxygen concentrator, Adira felt a glimmer of the future her mother once spoke of so wistfully. Then one stormy afternoon, a man in a tailored suit arrived at their apartment escorting two heavily armed guards. Word spread quickly through the block, causing windows to slam shut in instinctual fear. Adira opened the door to see the man's calculating gaze sweep across their cramped living room. He didn't remove the respirator from his face, giving the impression that he'd arrived from some higher realm where the air was pristine. He introduced himself as the liaison for a private corporation, praising her mother's scientific background and Adira's engineering prowess. If they cooperated, they would gain privileged entry into an oxygen forest facility for research and development. Where exactly this forest stood, or which corporation it served, he did not reveal. Rather than being flattered, Adira's mother stiffened. She understood that no man with such wealth and security would offer an opportunity without an underlying cost. Adira, however, was intrigued. Was this not the break they had dreamed of? A chance to step inside a place where the air was guaranteed to be clean? The man sensed her enthusiasm. He allowed them a moment to deliberate, though for him, the matter seemed already settled. He was too self-assured, as if the promise of fresh air was currency enough to buy anyone's loyalty. Against her mother's warnings, Adira insisted they accept the invitation, imagining not just a brief respite, but an opportunity to see firsthand the wonders that might be used to help those suffering outside. Her mother reluctantly agreed, though Adira noticed her lips drawn tight as if bracing for a fall. 2 days later, they found themselves ushered into a sleek black vehicle that navigated the cratered roads with surprising ease. Guards in tinted helmets escorted them, their rifles gleaming with advanced technology that Adira had never seen before. The route they took was convoluted, likely by design, winding beneath giant overpasses, past checkpoints manned by uniformed men with suspicious eyes, until they finally reached a set of colossal gates. The gates slid open with hardly a sound, revealing a hidden haven that stretched wide under a canopy of shimmering leaves. The air that drifted into the vehicle had an immediate effect on Adira's lungs. She inhaled so sharply that her head spun. Even from inside the car, she could sense the difference. This was oxygen in its purest form, like tasting water after days parched in the desert. She felt alive, more so in that one breath than she'd ever felt before. Stepping out, she nearly sank to the ground in a wave of exhilaration. If not for her mother's steadying hand, she would have collapsed. The liaison seemed pleased at her reaction. He motioned toward the towers hidden between the mutated giant trees where science labs gleamed behind tinted glass. Adira's breath caught in her throat at the sight. So much technology, so many secrets that could possibly save the outside world. Yet the atmosphere felt sterile, unnerving. There were no birds singing, no insects buzzing, only the hum of pressurized air systems and the subtle crackle of electricity. She looked up at the pale turquoise leaves fluttering overhead. Their color was mesmerizing, a manufactured palette. Under ordinary circumstances, she might have smirked at the audacity of humans attempting to outdo nature, but the effect was dazzling and a bit unsettling. Their work began immediately. Her mother, assigned to a lab station, examined sap samples and measured photosynthetic rates under varied conditions. Adira was taken to a workshop brimming with electronic parts where she was tasked with calibrating new filtration prototypes. The man in the suit, Victor, was his name, checked in daily, monitoring their progress with a steely calm. Adira found him polite, but intimidating. As she and her mother ventured deeper into the facility, they discovered entire wings dedicated to luxurious amenities for the elite. Cottages perched near waterfalls of artificially purified water, well-stocked kitchens offering fresh produce grown hydroponically. It was surreal to see such abundance when, not far beyond these gates, people clawed for scraps. Victor made it clear such comforts were only for high-ranking individuals and benefactors of the corporation. Even though Adira and her mother were now valued contributors, they were still kept at arm's length, lodged in an external barracks with other scientists of lesser rank. Days turned into weeks, and Adira found herself torn between two emotions: gratitude for each refreshing breath and an increasing sense of guilt. She had never felt so healthy. Her muscles grew stronger with each day spent in the oxygen-rich environment, her mind more focused than ever. At the same time, she recalled the sunken faces of friends trapped outside in a haze of pollution. It weighed on her that she was now aiding a project that could easily remain exclusive to the wealthy, prolonging a cruel divide. Late at night, she would talk with her mother about these worries. Her mother, however, seemed more resigned, perhaps haunted by whatever knowledge she had gleaned after examining the facility's research data. She would whisper that the elites had no intention of sharing the technology, that each breakthrough was locked under layers of corporate secrecy. "We need to find a way out," she'd say. "We need to bring this knowledge to those who need it." Working with advanced equipment gave them hope that they might replicate or at least record vital processes, but it was never going to be simple. Armed guards circled the labs, and the computers were protected by specialized encryption. One misstep, and they would lose even the sanctuary they had, possibly their lives. Adira noticed her mother growing more anxious. She spoke in hushed tones about seeing errors in the genetic blueprint of the trees, a potential risk that might cause them to fail in certain conditions. Yet the heads of the operation seemed more interested in controlling the supply of fresh air than in ensuring the forest's stability. One afternoon, Adira stumbled upon a dimly lit corridor leading to a sealed chamber. A small window revealed an underground nursery where saplings were grown in transparent tubes. She saw the withering hearts of some prototype tiny seedlings, half-burned, their leaves withering at the edges. The image lodged itself in her mind, a silent indictment of the so-called miracle forest. She realized that these beautifully tailored trees were not as perfect as they were made out to be. If flawed, they might collapse under environmental stress. On a large scale, that could put all the oxygen production at risk, but the corporation seemed unconcerned. She thought about how catastrophic it would be for the people outside if, one day, the same air that was promised to them as a possible remedy turned out to be a myth. She decided she had to do something. Her opportunity came unexpectedly. Late one evening, a power surge rippled through the facility. The lights flickered and alarm systems began wailing through the corridors. Adira scrambled out of the workshop, scanning for any sign of her mother. Scientists in lab coats were rushing every which way, while security officers barked orders into their radios. Amid the confusion, Adira slipped into the restricted corridor with the underground nursery. The usual guard post was momentarily abandoned. Her heart pounded as she hastily typed in commands on one of the lab's consoles, searching for data logs about the tree's genetic stability and oxygen yield. She transferred copied files onto a handheld device she had built from spare parts. That's when a flashing red icon caught her eye. Emergency lockdown initiated. The system was going into a fail-safe mode, intending to seal all high-safety areas. She managed to slip out at the last second, the heavy doors thundering shut behind her. Before she could breathe a sigh of relief, a firm hand clamped down on her shoulder. She spun around to find Victor. The flickering red alarm lights danced across his steely features. He stared at her calmly, as though he had suspected her all along. His approach was eerily polite. "You're curious. That's not a bad thing, but you should know that curiosity comes with a heavy price in places like this." Adira tried to keep her composure, slipping the device deeper into her pocket as she spoke. She sputtered something about searching for her mother, worried about her safety after the power surge. Victor's expression remained unreadable. He didn't press the matter further. Instead, he escorted her back toward the labs, lips pursed in thought. She feared he might examine her pockets at any moment. They found her mother in a side corridor, knees pressed against the cold floor. She looked terrified but uninjured. Relief flooded Adira as she helped her mother stand. Victor raised an eyebrow at the pair of them, his silent suspicion lingering in the tense air. "We'll move you to a more secure location for the evening," he stated. A guard stepped forward, leading them down a passage that opened into a windowless holding area, furnished with little more than 2 cots and a surveillance camera blinking ominously in a corner. That night, in hushed whispers, Adira showed her mother the device. Her mother's eyes flickered with a mix of pride and terror. "We must find a way to get this data back outside," she urged. "If the rest of the world learns what we've discovered, maybe we can reshape this travesty." Morning came, but with it a new round of enforced isolation. The meltdown in the power grid had apparently corrupted a portion of the mainframe, and the staff was in crisis mode. The door to their makeshift cell finally opened hours later. An armed guard escorted her mother away for an urgent meeting, leaving Adira behind. Alone, she pressed her ear to the door, listening to distant footsteps. She wondered if there was any chance of escape. As she strained to catch echoes of conversation, Adira heard a single gunshot echo through the corridor. Her blood ran cold. Time lurched forward in slow motion. She scrambled to the edge of the open door, peering down the hallway. Shouts, running footsteps, then quiet. The guard who had taken her mother was gone. The corridor was empty. Terrified and desperate, Adira crept through deserted passages, searching for any sign of her mother's whereabouts. Eventually, she arrived at a storage bay ringed with metal crates. Through a glass wall, she saw the oxygen forest's artificial canopy bathed in the morning's pale light. There, at the base of a tree with turquoise leaves, lay her mother, motionless on the ground, a small pool of blood around her body. For a moment, Adira was too stunned to cry out. Then the sorrow and rage flooded her, tears carving paths down her cheeks. She ran, hysterical, to her mother's side, but it was already too late. Her mother's eyes were half open, fixed on some distant point. Lips parted as though about to speak. Her mother's last sight was a place that was supposed to be an oasis of hope, but had instead proved to be a trap. Adira felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Victor again, his eyes filled with a hollow regret. She was trying to sabotage the systems, he said softly, as though that would excuse the carnage. I'm sorry, but we can't allow that. We have to preserve the progress we've made. In that moment, any illusions Adira had of his politeness vanished. He was the personification of this entire system, a veneer of refined civility under which lay brutal control. She rose to her feet, tears still streaming, unaware that the handheld device was clutched tightly in her fist. Your progress is a lie, she spat. These forests are flawed. They're not stable. They might even fail if you push them too hard. And you're keeping this knowledge from everyone who might fix it. He frowned, slightly taken aback by the vehemence in her voice. These labs are meant for the elite, who have chosen to fund the new world, he countered in a measured tone. There's no reason to incite panic or risk sabotage. If the lesser segments of society got hold of this technology, chaos would ensue. Before he could say another word, Adira bolted. Driven by grief and adrenaline, she sprinted toward the perimeter gates. Guards yelled for her to halt, but she wove through the greenhouse-like corridors, ducking behind crates and sliding under partially lowered shutters. Alarms rang out again, the entire facility thrown into turmoil. She felt a bullet whistle overhead, striking a corridor pipe and sending a hiss of steam into the air. Her lungs burned, fueled by anguish, but surging with the pristine oxygen that ironically gave her the strength to keep running. At last, she burst through a final set of gates, stumbling onto the gravel outside. The difference in air quality was jarring, a suffocating, noxious wave crashing onto her. But she pressed on, coughing violently. She kept the device pressed against her side. She had no illusions that the data alone was enough to topple the fortress of corporate power, yet it was a critical piece of proof. Proof that, behind the glossy illusions of these forests, cracks were forming. Proof that these facilities were not unstoppable bastions of salvation, but precarious constructs fated to fail if managed by greed alone. Smoke rose in the distance from industrial vents, and shrill alarms continued behind her. She paused only for a second, glancing back at the monstrous wall that surrounded the oxygen forest. The pain of her mother's death stabbed at her heart, but she also felt a fierce determination. She wiped sweat and tears from her face with her forearm. She thought of the people crowded into the battered city blocks, suffocating daily, and realized that her mother's last wish had been to share the knowledge, to try to awaken people to the truth of what was happening behind those walls. The grit under her boots reminded her of the dangerous terrain ahead. Yet for the first time since she'd entered those pristine biolabs, she breathed as a free person, gasping, coughing, and nearly choking on the toxicity of the world outside, but free nonetheless. She needed allies, people who believed that oxygen should not be a luxury but a right. Perhaps there were underground networks, rebellious scientists, or rogue engineers who would stand with her. She imagined them all banding together to replicate or adapt the forest technology in a way that served everyone, not just the privileged. And if that technology failed due to hidden flaws, so be it. She would rather risk everything than allow a few elites to hoard even the possibility of life. The day dragged on, and she continued moving. Whenever her legs threatened to give out from exhaustion, she recalled the glint of hope in her mother's eyes whenever she spoke about scientific breakthroughs. That memory propelled her forward. She would carry the torch her mother had sparked, forging ties among the scattered communities outside. If the elite had built walls to isolate their oasis of fresh air, then the rest of humanity had an obligation to tear those walls down. Figuratively, perhaps, technology could be shared, seeds of a new forest planted for all, not just a select few. The dream was big, but it was all she had left. Nightfall brought a cool relief, though acidic mists still curled around every broken fence and deserted alley. Adira found a discreet corner between two ruined buildings, trying her best to stave off exhaustion. By now her entire body shook. She rummaged in a small pouch for a battered inhaler, her old failsafe, taking measured puffs to steady her breath. She pressed her back against the wall, the device with stolen data tucked safely into her jacket. In the distance, light from the walled forest shimmered like a mirage, more menacing than enchanting now. A hush enveloped the city as the final glimmers of daylight vanished behind smog-laden skies. For a moment, she wondered if her mother's spirit watched over her, urging her onward. The notion brought an odd comfort. In the end, she was just one figure hunched in the darkness, longing for a more just world, but she refused to succumb to despair. With trembling hands, she clutched the stolen technology, the first real evidence of the facility's imperfections. She would press on, clandestinely if necessary, urging others to see the truth. She might fail, might be hunted or killed, but she couldn't stand by while the poor choked in the shadows and the privileged basked in tailored forests of false salvation. Resolved, Adira closed her eyes, already planning her next move. She envisioned a future in which every child breathed clean air without obtaining permission from a corporate elite. The promise of that future blazed bright in her mind, lighting a path through the suffocating darkness. Beyond the horizon, others must also be wrestling with the same urgent questions, the same suffocating fear. She would find them, and they would stand together against those who believed they alone deserved to breathe freely. It was a small hope, a whisper in the night, but sometimes a whisper is all that's needed to start a roar that tears down walls. Adira could almost hear her mother's voice urging her not to give up. Gathering her courage, she set out into the gloom, refusing to let the oxygen oasis remain a privilege for the few. She moved with conviction, carrying her mother's dream in one hand and the key to unraveling the tyranny of the forest in the other.